My name is Sienna. I am 34 years old. My 7-year-old son Trey and I had just walked up the long sweeping driveway to our Buckhead mansion when I saw them. The evening air was thick and humid, but a sudden chill ran down my spine. My husband DeAndre and his mistress Vanessa were already waiting on the front porch holding divorce papers. She smirked, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. "Pack your bags. This house has no room for a leech." I smiled an easy, genuine smile. "Okay." "What is so funny?" she snapped, crossing her arms over her chest. I calmly replied, "Actually, this house belongs to me." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to arrogant people who underestimated your worth and tried to push you out of your own life. Trust me, you will want to hear how I handled what came next. The summer heat of Atlanta hung heavy around us, but my focus narrowed to a laser point. DeAndre stood tall in his tailored Italian suit, a smug, entitled expression plastered across his face. Vanessa clung to his arm, dripping in excessive designer logos that I knew for an absolute fact she could not afford on her lifestyle influencer budget. They stood there on the sprawling slate porch expecting a dramatic reaction. They expected me to scream. They wanted me to cry, beg for forgiveness, or make a hysterical scene in front of our wealthy neighbors. Instead, I looked down at my son. Trey was gripping his school backpack, looking confused and slightly frightened by the aggressive strangers standing at our front door. I absolutely refused to let my child witness the destruction of his father. I did not break eye contact with my husband as I pulled out my phone. I tapped a speed dial number, keeping my breathing even and my face completely blank. "Hey, Denise," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly steady. "Yes, we just got back from basketball practice. Listen, Trey was hoping he could take you up on that offer for a video game night with Marcus. Is the offer still good?" I listened to my neighbor agree enthusiastically from across the hedge. "Thank you so much," I replied. "I will send him right over." I crouched down to Trey level and smoothed the collar of his polo shirt. "Go on over to Marcus' house, sweetie. I have some boring adult paperwork to sort out with your dad. We will order pizza later." Trey beamed, oblivious to the massive tension radiating from the porch, and sprinted across the perfectly manicured lawn to the neighboring estate. I stood back up and smoothed my own linen skirt. The battlefield was now completely clear. The collateral damage was safely removed. Now it was just the three of us standing on the steps of a $2 million property, and the gloves were finally coming off. DeAndre let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. He adjusted his expensive watch, a habit he developed whenever he wanted to remind everyone around him of his perceived financial superiority. "That was smart, Sienna. I am glad you are not making this difficult in front of the boy. Now let us get straight to business. You have exactly 1 hour to get your things out of my house." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my posture completely relaxed. "Your house. My house," he declared, his voice booming with the arrogant authority of a vice president at a top-tier investment fund. "I pay the massive mortgage. I pay the utility bills. I provide the lavish lifestyle you have been comfortably leeching off of for the past decade. It is time for you to go back to reality." Vanessa leaned forward, clicking her long acrylic nails against her phone case. "Honestly, DeAndre is being extremely generous, giving you an hour. If it were up to me, your cheap bags would already be on the curb." She looked me up and down, her lip curling in intense disgust. "Look at you. You are pushing 35, still playing around with some little freelance blogging gig that barely pays for your daily groceries. DeAndre needs a woman who truly understands the black elite of Atlanta. A woman who can stand beside him at high-profile charity galas and corporate dinners. You are just a dead weight, holding him back from his true potential." DeAndre puffed out his chest, clearly emboldened by his much younger mistress stroking his fragile ego. "She is completely right, Sienna. The corporate world is fiercely cutthroat. A black man in my position has to work twice as hard to maintain respect among the executives. I cannot have a wife who contributes absolutely nothing to our investment portfolio. Vanessa is building an empire. She has brand deals and thousands of followers. You have a dusty laptop and a pathetic hobby. We are upgrading this household and you are no longer part of the aesthetic. I let the rapid-fire insults wash over me without a single reaction. I did not flinch when Vanessa criticized the simple clothes I wore. I did not react when DeAndre belittled the career I had supposedly been failing at for 10 years. What they did not know was that my boring freelance blogging gig was an impenetrable cover story. In reality, I was a high-stakes crisis public relations operative. I spent my days cleaning up the devastating messes of politicians, billionaires, and elite corporate executives. I dismantled entire empires before breakfast. Dealing with a narcissistic mid-level finance bro and a desperate Instagram influencer was practically a vacation for me. I stepped closer to them, maintaining my perfectly placid smile. "I want to make sure I understand everything correctly," I said, clasping my hands together in front of me. "You are kicking me out of this house tonight." DeAndre nodded eagerly, pulling a thick stack of legal documents from his custom leather briefcase. "Yes, tonight, right now. Here are the official divorce papers. My lawyers have already drawn up everything. I am a reasonable man, Sienna. I am not going to leave the mother of my child completely destitute on the streets. I have included a $5,000 check in there to help you secure a lease on a modest apartment. Maybe something out in the distant suburbs where you belong." He thrust the papers toward me along with a heavy gold fountain pen. Vanessa scoffed, rolling her eyes. $5,000 is way more than she deserves, babe. That could have bought my new designer shoes, but I guess we can consider it a charity donation for tax season. She stepped closer, pointing a manicured finger at the massive mahogany front door. "We are going to have to gut this whole place anyway. Your taste is incredibly basic. I am bringing in custom Italian furniture by the weekend, so pack whatever cheap clothes you have and leave the real valuables behind." I took the papers and the gold pen from DeAndre, weighing them carefully in my hands. "So just to be absolutely clear," I murmured, flipping slowly through the dense pages of legal jargon, "you are claiming this Buckhead mansion is your sole premarital asset. You are claiming you own it entirely because you bring in all the big money." DeAndre rolled his eyes, exasperated by my apparent financial ignorance. "Obviously. My name is on the original bank statements. My elite status secured this property. You contributed zero capital to the purchase of this estate. Therefore, you have zero claim to it. Sign the papers, Sienna. Take the $5,000 and walk away before I decide to take that off the table, too." I let a long, heavy silence stretch between us. I looked at the glossy pages of the divorce decree. I looked at the shiny gold pen. Then I looked at my husband, who was standing tall, convinced he had successfully orchestrated the perfect coup. He truly thought he had outsmarted a naive dependent housewife. He thought his dirty secrets were safe. He thought he held all the power in the world. I smiled again, showing my teeth in a grin that did not reach my eyes. I asked him one final time, keeping my tone dangerously soft. "Are you absolutely certain you want to play this game, DeAndre? Because once I sign these papers, there is no going back for you." He laughed, a booming, arrogant sound that echoed loudly across the spacious porch. "I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life. Sign the papers." I stared down at the crisp white pages illuminated by the warm glow of the porch lights. The humid breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak trees lining our massive front yard. DeAndre crossed his arms over his chest, his bespoke suit shifting perfectly with his movements. He really believed he had won. He believed that his corporate title, his aggressive posturing, and his new flashy mistress had successfully intimidated me into submission. Vanessa pulled out her phone and started taking a selfie, her lips puckered for her imaginary audience, completely ignoring the heavy reality of the situation unfolding right next to her. They were so utterly consumed by their own superficial vanity that they failed to notice the trap snapping shut around their ankles. I uncapped the heavy gold fountain pen, letting the metal catch the light. The ink flowed smoothly as I prepared to make my move. "You really should have paid more attention to the fine print, DeAndre," I whispered. Before he could even process my whispered warning, the aggressive screech of heavy tires on the expensive pavement interrupted us. A massive, pristine white luxury SUV swerved violently into the circular driveway, stopping inches behind my car. The heavy doors slammed open with synchronized hostility. DeAndre had brought his toxic reinforcements, His older sister Kendra and her husband Darius marched up the stone walkway, looking like they were dressed for a high society brunch rather than an eviction. Kendra wore a tailored designer jumpsuit that screamed new money, while Darius adjusted the cuffs of a blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But it was not their ridiculous outfits that caught my attention. It was what they were holding. Kendra and Darius were aggressively gripping giant, heavy-duty black trash bags. They marched up the steps with matching expressions of sheer malicious joy. The cavalry had arrived to help me pack. Or rather, they had arrived to completely humiliate me. DeAndre smirked, gesturing toward his sister. I figured you might need some motivation to move quickly, Sienna. Kendra graciously volunteered to help you gather your little blogging supplies and whatever cheap rags you have cluttering up my master closet. Kendra stomped onto the porch, thrusting the crinkling plastic bags toward my chest. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I just looked at the shiny black plastic and then up into her deeply bitter eyes. I told DeAndre to just hire a junk removal service. Kendra sneered, her voice dripping with venom. But he is too soft-hearted. He wanted to give you a chance to salvage your pathetic little life before we completely sanitize this property. Darius stepped up beside her, crossing his massive arms. His arrogant stance mirrored DeAndre perfectly. Let us get this over with fast, he barked. We have reservations at an exclusive steakhouse at 8, and I am not ruining my evening breathing in the scent of a desperate squatter. The sheer audacity of their arrival was almost comical. They had planned this ambush perfectly. They wanted to break me down to watch me scramble and cry while they literally treated my belongings like garbage. I kept my face entirely impassive, absorbing their hostility like a sponge soaking up water. Kendra did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past me, marching into the grand foyer of the mansion with Vanessa eagerly following close behind. I slowly turned and followed them inside, watching as they began critiquing every single detail of the home I had meticulously maintained. You know, Sienna, Kendra announced, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings, I told my brother from the very beginning that you were a massive mistake. You never belonged in our family. You never fit the aesthetic. She tossed one of the black trash bags onto the custom rug. You did not even pledge a prominent sorority. You did not attend a respected historically black college. You have absolutely no legacy, no pedigree, and no real connections in this city. You are just a regular basic woman who got extremely lucky that a man of DeAndre caliber decided to throw you a bone. Vanessa giggled loudly, running her hand along the expensive banister. That is exactly what I was telling him, Kendra. She lacks the foundational polish required for this level of society. Kendra turned to Vanessa, her face lighting up with an exaggerated fake warmth that she never once directed toward me in 10 years of marriage. Exactly, Vanessa. You completely understand the assignment. You know how to cultivate a brand. You know how to network with the right elite circles. You come from a family that actually understands generational wealth. You are a true lifestyle influencer who knows how to elevate a successful black man. You are exactly what the women in our family are supposed to be. Beautiful, connected, and ambitious. Kendra turned her vicious glare back to me. Look at you, Sienna. You do not even know how to dress for your husband's tax bracket. You hide behind your little computer typing up irrelevant blog posts, while DeAndre is out here moving mountains in the financial district. A man functioning at his elite level needs a partner who can host charity galas, who can secure tables at the country club, who actually knows how to speak to senators and billionaires without embarrassing him. You have always been a dark stain on our family portrait. We have spent the last decade trying to hide your lack of ambition from our peers. DeAndre finally woke up and realized he was driving a Ferrari while chained to a rusted anchor. I stood near the marble kitchen island, silently listening to Kendra unleash years of pent-up elitist venom. She was projecting every single insecurity she had onto me. She believed that wearing the right letters on a jacket and attending the right debutante balls made her vastly superior. She truly believed that wealth was defined entirely by who invited you to their private suites and what designer logo was plastered across your handbag. I did not interrupt her tirade. I let her speak. I let her lay out every arrogant, elitist assumption she held about my intelligence and my worth. Every word she weaponized against me was just another nail in her own coffin. I cataloged her insults, storing them neatly in my mind. She was defending a fragile glass house while holding a sledgehammer, and I was going to let her smash it to pieces. "You are completely quiet because you know I am right," Kendra spat aggressively, shoving past me toward the living room. "You have absolutely nothing to say because you bring absolutely nothing to the table. You are being discarded today because you are obsolete. It is survival of the fittest, Sienna, and you are incredibly weak." I simply offered her a polite, tight smile. My silence was not weakness. It was calculated restraint. Darius had been lingering near the doorway, watching the verbal execution with immense satisfaction. Now it was his turn to feed his massive ego. He strutted into the foyer, clapping DeAndre on the shoulder like they had just won a championship game. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "Do not take it too personally, Sienna," he chuckled, adjusting his expensive tie. "Finance is a ruthless game. You either compound your value or you get liquidated. You are a bad asset. DeAndre is just trimming the fat from his portfolio." Darius walked over to the kitchen island, leaning against the pristine marble. He worked directly under my husband at Crescent Wealth, a high-profile investment firm that handled massive institutional funds. He thought his proximity to millions of dollars made him a god among men. "You literally have no concept of how the real world operates, Sienna. You sit at home playing on the internet while we are in the boardroom shifting millions of dollars across global markets. We secure massive portfolios for the wealthiest families in Atlanta. We handle complex algorithms, hedge funds, and aggressive corporate takeovers. You probably do not even know how to balance a simple checkbook." He let out a condescending sigh, shaking his head. "That $5,000 check DeAndre is offering you is entirely too generous. If I were him, I would have handed you a bus pass and a harsh dose of reality. You have no financial literacy. You have no real-world survival skills. You are completely dependent on the very man you are currently staring at. When you walk out of those doors tonight, you will be utterly helpless. You will finally realize that your comfortable little bubble was entirely funded by our relentless hard work." I kept my breathing steady and my posture relaxed. Darius was boasting about shifting millions of dollars. He was bragging about handling massive portfolios. He felt so secure in his corporate armor. He believed his job title shielded him from any possible consequence. He was loudly declaring his absolute financial dominance while standing in a house he could not afford to buy, criticizing a woman who could buy and sell him 10 times over. I continued to absorb every single arrogant insult. I let him bask in his imaginary supremacy. I took careful mental notes of his exact phrasing. He mentioned shifting millions. He mentioned corporate takeovers. He felt incredibly confident about the funds he managed at Crescent Wealth. My silence was not submission. It was a strategic assessment of my targets. They were handing me the exact weapons I needed to completely destroy them. They thought I was a pathetic, clueless housewife standing paralyzed by their overwhelming superiority. They thought my lack of reaction meant I was defeated, broken, and ready to surrender. I looked at Kendra, gripping her heavy-duty trash bags, ready to throw my life away. I looked at Darius, smiling smugly, completely convinced of his financial invincibility. I looked at Vanessa, admiring herself in the hallway mirror, already planning her takeover of the property. And finally, I looked at DeAndre holding the divorce papers, waiting for my capitulation. I had let them talk. I had let them reveal exactly who they were. Now it was my turn to speak. Before I could even form my first word, DeAndre let out a sharp sigh of profound impatience. He lifted his left wrist and aggressively tapped the face of his heavy gold Rolex. The diamonds embedded in the bezel caught the harsh glow of the chandelier. "You have exactly 45 minutes left, Sienna," he announced, his voice laced with absolute finality. "The clock is ticking, and I am losing my legendary patience. Stop standing there and start signing the documents. I have laid everything out clearly. You are getting a very generous severance package for your years of lackluster service. He picked up the thick stack of divorce papers from the marble kitchen island and shoved them roughly across the smooth surface toward me. On the second page, you will see the stipulation for the $5,000 cashier check. He continued gesturing with his pen. That is more than enough for the deposit and first month's rent on a decent little apartment. Maybe a modest two-bedroom down in South Fulton or Decatur, somewhere aligned with your actual socioeconomic status. Pack up your cheap clothes and your little blogging equipment and start over. DeAndre puffed out his chest, looking around the grand foyer with a sickening sense of ownership. Do not try to fight me for this property in court. This Buckhead mansion is an untouchable premarital asset. I bought this land. I built this estate. The deed is strictly in my name, and my elite credit score secured the financing. You have absolutely zero legal right to a single square foot of this property. My lawyers will destroy you if you try to claim a dime of my equity. Take the $5,000. Be grateful I am not leaving you completely penniless, and get out of my house before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. I am a very important man, Sienna, and I do not have time for a messy, drawn-out domestic dispute. You are dealing with a heavyweight executive now. Just sign your name on the dotted line, take your pity check, and disappear quietly. I watched him tap the document again, his arrogance blinding him to the reality of the situation. Vanessa decided to assert her new dominance as the lady of the house. She brazenly pushed past me, her excessive perfume leaving a suffocating trail in the air. Her stiletto heels clicked against the hardwood floors as she strutted into the living room. She placed her hands on her hips, loudly criticizing the interior design I had meticulously curated. DeAndre, baby, we are going to have to throw all of this out immediately, Vanessa complained, her high-pitched voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She ran a manicured finger over a custom velvet accent chair and openly scoffed. This entire aesthetic is incredibly cheap. It gives major discount store vibes. The energy in this space is completely wrong for a man of your caliber. We need to clear out all of her basic pedestrian clutter by tomorrow morning. She turned around, striking a pose in the center of the room. I already know exactly what we need to elevate this estate. I have a connection with an exclusive importer who can get us custom Italian furniture directly from Milan. We need genuine leather, modern art, and statement pieces that actually reflect generational wealth. I want everything delivered and installed by this weekend so I can film a proper house tour for my channel. My followers have been begging for lifestyle content, and I refuse to showcase this embarrassing decor. DeAndre smiled warmly at his mistress, nodding his head in absolute agreement. Whatever you want, beautiful. This is your kingdom now. We will throw her cheap trash in the dumpster tonight, and you can max out the platinum card on whatever Italian furniture you desire. Vanessa squealed in delight, clapping her hands together. We should host a massive housewarming party next month, too, she added excitedly. We can invite all the prominent politicians, the athletes, and the heavy hitters from your firm. We will show all of Atlanta that DeAndre has finally upgraded to a woman who matches his elite status. I stood silently in the kitchen, watching her measure my windows, with her eyes already mentally erasing my entire existence from the property. Her absolute delusion was staggering. I finally stopped smiling. The docile mask I had been wearing vanished, replaced by cold, calculating precision. I did not reach for the heavy gold pen. I did not look at the insulting $5,000 check. Instead, I unzipped my structured leather tote bag and reached inside. My movements were slow, deliberate, and completely devoid of the panic they were so desperately waiting to see. I pulled out a thick manila folder and dropped it onto the marble countertop next to DeAndre's stack of divorce papers. You are mistaken about a few critical facts, DeAndre, I said, my voice carrying an authoritative edge that immediately wiped the smug grin off his face. I reached out and tapped my manicured fingernail against the manila folder. Open it. DeAndre frowned, his bravado faltering for a fraction of a second. What is this garbage, Sienna? Stop stalling and sign the divorce papers. I said, open the folder, I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip through the grand foyer. Darius and Kendra flinched at the sudden shift in my tone. DeAndre swallowed hard, his eyes darting to his sister, before he hesitantly reached out and flipped open the heavy folder. Inside rested a perfectly preserved, legally certified property deed stamped with the official seal of Fulton County. DeAndre stared at the document in deep confusion. He read the top line, and his mouth fell open. He read it again, his eyes scanning the legal jargon frantically. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice losing all its previous power. "It says the property owner is Onyx Holdings, LLC. What the hell is Onyx Holdings?" "Onyx Holdings is me," I replied smoothly, stepping closer to the island until I was staring directly into his panicked eyes. "It is the corporate entity I established to manage my private real estate investments. You see, DeAndre, you are not a financial genius. You are actually an incredibly reckless gambler who uses corporate buzzwords to hide your incompetence. 4 years ago, you made a series of highly aggressive, catastrophic trades on margin. You completely wiped out your savings and defaulted on the mortgage of this exact Buckhead mansion." DeAndre's face turned the color of ash. He tried to speak, but only a strangled gasp escaped his throat. Kendra and Darius stepped closer, their eyes wide with shock. "The bank was 48 hours away from putting this estate on the auction block and throwing you out on the street." I continued, projecting my voice so every single toxic person in the room could hear me clearly. "You were terrified. You were crying in the guest bedroom, begging the universe for a miracle so your elite friends would not find out you were broke. So I provided that miracle. I used Onyx Holdings to quietly purchase your defaulted debt from the bank. I bought the house, DeAndre. I own the land, the structure, and every single square foot of this $2 million property." I let that devastating truth hang in the air, watching the arrogant executive's entire world crumble in real time. "For the past 4 years, you have not been paying a mortgage, DeAndre. You have been paying rent to my holding company. I am your landlord. And because you have been spending all your money buying designer bags for a 26-year-old influencer, you have missed your rent payments for the last 3 consecutive months." Vanessa gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Kendra gripped the edge of the kitchen island, her knees visibly trembling. I reached into the folder and pulled out a second document, sliding it directly toward DeAndre's trembling hands. "This is your official notice to vacate," I stated coldly. "You are legally in breach of your lease agreement. You do not have 45 minutes to kick me out of my own home. You have exactly 0 minutes. You are actively trespassing on my private property. I am tearing up your pathetic $5,000 pity check, and I am officially serving you with an eviction notice." I watched his eyes dart wildly around the grand foyer, searching for some loophole, some escape hatch that simply did not exist. The man who had strutted onto my porch, radiating untouchable superiority, was now visibly shrinking, completely emasculated by a single certified piece of paper bearing my name. I looked at Vanessa, who was standing frozen in the living room, staring at the custom velvet accent chair she had just called cheap. "By the way, Vanessa," I added, my voice dripping with dark amusement, "you will not be ordering any custom Italian furniture for this estate. You will not be hosting any high-profile charity galas here either. You are currently standing in my living room, and I want your cheap perfume out of my house immediately." The profound silence that followed was absolute perfection. The powerful, untouchable vice president of Crescent Wealth was currently staring at a legal document proving he was nothing more than a delinquent tenant. I had just broken my harmless blogger cover story and initiated the first massive strike. They had walked onto my porch expecting to slaughter a lamb, but they had just locked themselves in a cage with a lion. DeAndre stared at the official county deed for a long, agonizing moment before his self-preservation instincts violently kicked in. His face shifted from chalky white to a deep, furious red. He slammed his heavy fist down onto the marble kitchen island, causing the expensive divorce papers to scatter across the counter. "This is a pathetic, desperate joke, Sienna!" he roared, his voice echoing sharply against the vaulted ceilings. He snatched the eviction notice and crumpled it in his fist, hurling it onto the floor. "You really think you can print some garbage documents off the internet and scare me in front of my own family? You think I am some uneducated fool who cannot recognize a forged document when it is shoved in his face?" He turned to Vanessa and Kendra, letting out a loud, exaggerated laugh that sounded entirely hollow. "Look at her," he sneered, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "Look at how completely unhinged she has become. I told you she was mentally unstable. She is losing her mind because she knows she is about to be tossed out on the street with absolutely nothing. She probably spent the last 3 days searching legal websites trying to craft this ridiculous fantasy where she is some secret real estate mogul. It is actually sad. It is a pathetic cry for attention from a woman who knows she has absolutely no value left. Vanessa crossed her arms over her chest, scoffing loudly. Oh my God, Sienna, this is so embarrassing for you. You really thought you could forge a property deed to keep a man who does not want you anymore. That is literally psychotic behavior. You need to take your little $5,000 check and use it to book yourself into a psychiatric ward. DeAndre puffed his chest out, taking a step toward me to use his physical size as intimidation. Let me remind you exactly who I am, Sienna. I am the vice president of Crescent Wealth. I bring in $500,000 a year in base salary alone. I wear suits that cost more than your entire sad wardrobe. I drive a Porsche. I sit in private suites at the stadium. I make the money. I pay the bills. I provide the lifestyle. There is absolutely zero mathematical possibility that a stay-at-home blogger with a failing website somehow orchestrated a corporate buyout of a $2 million estate. You do not have the brain capacity, the capital, or the legal connections to even understand what a holding company is, let alone operate one. I own this house because I am the breadwinner. You are just a parasite trying to suck my blood on your way out the door. Now pick up this trash before I have you arrested for forgery. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his frantic yelling. I simply kept my eyes locked on his, watching the frantic pulse beating visibly in his neck. His loud, aggressive posturing was the ultimate confirmation of his terror. He was drowning in his own denial, desperately trying to gaslight me in front of his audience to maintain the illusion of his supreme authority. But documents do not lie, and screaming does not alter public records. Darius had been standing silently near the edge of the kitchen, listening to DeAndre yell. As an executive financial analyst, Darius dealt with corporate acquisitions, legal disclosures, and high-stakes asset transfers every single day. The loud denial from my husband was not enough to satisfy his professional curiosity. Darius stepped forward, his face set in a hard, skeptical frown. Let me see, that he demanded, pushing past Kendra to reach the marble island. DeAndre grabbed the certified deed, trying to pull it away. It is fake, Darius. Do not even waste your time looking at her desperate arts and crafts project. Let me see the damn paper, DeAndre Darius snapped, snatching the heavy document out of my husband's hands. Darius adjusted his stance and held the deed up to the light of the chandelier. I watched his eyes track across the page. I watched him examine the raised, embossed seal of Fulton County. I watched him scrutinize the watermark, the official filing codes, the notary signatures, and the corporate registration numbers for Onyx Holdings, LLC. The entire room went dead silent save for the sound of Darius breathing. His eyes widened. The arrogant, confident posture he had maintained since marching onto my porch completely vanished. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking physically ill. He flipped to the second page, his hands beginning to shake slightly. He read the chain of title transfer. He read the exact date 4 years ago, when the bank officially relinquished the distressed mortgage to my holding company. He read the clause detailing the absolute transfer of all equity rights and property ownership. Darius lowered the paper slowly. He looked at DeAndre and then he looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. His mouth opened but no sound came out. Well, Kendra demanded, her voice shrill and impatient. Tell her it is a fake, Darius. Tell her we are calling the cops on her right now. Darius swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at his brother-in-law, his expression a mixture of profound shock and rising horror. DeAndre, he whispered, his voice cracking. DeAndre, this is real. What? DeAndre shouted, snatching the paper back. You are not looking at it right. I am looking at the county clerk's signature, DeAndre Darius fired back, his voice rising in panic. I am looking at the corporate tax ID. I am looking at the embossed state seal. You cannot forge this level of documentation. It is bulletproof. The chain of title was officially executed 4 years ago. Onyx Holdings is the sole proprietor of this land and this structure. He turned to look at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. She is not lying. She really owns the house. You have zero equity, DeAndre. You do not own a single brick of this estate. The silence that slammed into the foyer was deafening. DeAndre stared at Darius, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked down at the deed, and the reality of his complete financial ruin finally shattered his delusions. The house he had been using to impress his mistress, the estate he had been flaunting to his corporate friends, the property he was trying to kick me out of it all, belonged to the woman he had been mocking just 5 minutes ago. Vanessa broke the silence. Her sharp, high-pitched voice cut through the heavy air, like glass shattering on a tile floor. "Wait a minute!" she screeched, stepping away from DeAndre, as if he had suddenly caught a contagious disease. "What do you mean he does not own the house? What do you mean he has no equity?" Kendra rushed forward, trying to do damage control. "Vanessa, calm down. It is just a legal technicality. My brother is a vice president. He can easily fix this." Vanessa completely ignored Kendra. She marched right up to DeAndre, pointing a shaking acrylic nail at his chest. "Did you lie to me?" she demanded, her voice escalating into a hysterical shriek. "Did you bring me to this massive estate and promise me custom Italian furniture while you were secretly renting it from your own wife? Are you telling me I just posted a whole video to my thousands of followers bragging about moving into a $2 million mansion, and you are actually a squatter facing eviction?" DeAndre reached out frantically, trying to grab Vanessa's arms. "Baby, listen to me. Please just calm down and listen. It is a massive misunderstanding. The bank made a mistake 4 years ago. I can call my lawyers tomorrow morning and we can get this entire thing reversed. I have money, Vanessa. I have the salary. I can buy us another house by next week. Just do not make a scene right now." "Do not touch me!" Vanessa screamed, slapping his hands away with violent force. Her carefully crafted lifestyle influencer persona completely dissolved, revealing the absolute panic of a gold digger realizing she had struck dirt. "You told me you were untouchable, DeAndre. You told me you held all the power in this marriage. I dropped a professional basketball player for you because you promised me you owned this entire neighborhood. I spent the last 3 months letting you parade me around the city, telling all my friends I was upgrading to a top-tier executive. And now I find out you are 3 months behind on rent, and your basic boring wife is actually your landlord." She spun around, grabbing her expensive designer purse from the entryway table. "This is the most embarrassing moment of my entire life. I am not moving into a house that belongs to her. I am not letting my followers find out I got tricked by a fake millionaire who cannot even afford his own mortgage payments. You are a fraud, DeAndre. You are an absolute fraud." DeAndre looked like he was going to vomit. His entire world was collapsing, and his prized trophy piece was actively humiliating him in front of his family. "Vanessa, please," he begged, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. "I just bought you that luxury penthouse downtown. I just bought you the diamond tennis bracelet. I am providing the lifestyle I promised. You know I have the capital. Do not do this to me in front of her." I leaned back against the cool marble of the kitchen island, folding my arms and watching the absolute spectacular destruction of their unified front. Just 10 minutes ago, they were a powerful united team ready to throw me onto the street in garbage bags. Now they were tearing each other apart right in the middle of my foyer. Vanessa was hyperventilating, her eyes darting around the room as she calculated exactly how much social damage this revelation would cost her brand. DeAndre was sweating profusely, his elite corporate mask completely melted away, leaving only a desperate, pathetic man trying to cling to a mistress who was solely attracted to his bank account. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to throw a single insult. I just stood there in perfect silence, letting the immense weight of the truth crush them from the inside out. They had demanded a show, and I was more than happy to let them perform the tragedy of their own ruin. Kendra slammed her designer handbag onto the marble counter, her eyes flashing with a desperate, frantic energy. She could not stand watching her brother being dismantled by a woman she considered entirely beneath her. She grabbed Vanessa by the arm, spinning the panicked influencer around to face her. "Vanessa, stop acting like a hysterical child," Kendra barked, her voice echoing harshly in the grand foyer. "You are embarrassing yourself over a minor real estate technicality. So what if Sienna managed to pull a fast one with this specific property? It does not change a single thing about who DeAndre is or the massive capital he commands. He is a vice president at Crescent Wealth, Vanessa. Do you have any idea what that title actually means in this city? He brings in $500,000 a year in base salary alone, and that does not even include his performance bonuses, his corporate stock options, or his elite investment portfolios. This house is just one single asset in a massive financial empire. DeAndre can literally buy you a bigger, better, and more exclusive estate by next Tuesday. He can pay cash for a mansion in Tuxedo Park that makes this Buckhead property look like a starter home. He holds the real power, the money, the status, the respect of the elite circles that will never open their doors to a basic nobody like you. Kendra crossed her arms, her heavy gold bracelets clanking loudly against each other. Vanessa, wipe those tears off your face right now. You are leaving with a top-tier executive tonight. Do not let this desperate woman ruin your brand or your future. We are the elite, and she is just the trash we are taking out. Kendra turned her furious gaze back to me, her chest heaving as she tried to reconstruct the shattered illusion of their absolute superiority. You really thought you did something here, Sienna. You thought you could pull a fast one and suddenly become our equal. You are absolutely pathetic. You might have scammed your way into holding the deed to this one house, but you are still just a broke, isolated blogger. You do not have the liquid cash to maintain this property. You cannot afford the property taxes, the landscaping, or the massive utility bills. By next year, the bank will foreclose on you anyway, because you have zero actual income to sustain this level of luxury. DeAndre is a giant in the financial district. Kendra continued, her voice rising in a desperate crescendo. He is a prominent, respected Black executive who shakes hands with mayors and billionaires. He handles institutional wealth that you cannot even comprehend. He is going to walk out of here tonight with his high society mistress, and he is going not even remember your name by tomorrow morning. He will write a check for a new mansion, and you will be left sitting in this empty, echoing house, completely alone and entirely broke. You have no career, Sienna. You have no network. You have no future without my brother funding your pathetic existence. You won this one tiny battle, but DeAndre has already won the entire war because he holds the real power, the money. I let her finish her frantic, desperate monologue. I let the silence hang in the air for a long, heavy moment, while Kendra breathed heavily, her eyes wide and challenging. Then I threw my head back and I laughed. It was not a polite, quiet chuckle. It was a loud, booming, completely unrestrained laugh that bounced off the high walls and struck them like a physical blow. Kendra recoiled, her face twisting in confusion. DeAndre stared at me, his jaw tight, but his eyes filled with a new, creeping terror. Darius shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the ground beneath them was about to give way completely. You really believe all of that? Do not you, Kendra? I asked, wiping a tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye. You genuinely believe that I have spent the last 10 years writing cute little blog posts about interior decorating and vegan recipes? You honestly think I sit at a desk in the guest room, clipping digital coupons, while your brother supposedly conquers Wall Street? I stepped away from the kitchen island, closing the distance between us, until I was standing face to face with my sister-in-law. My voice dropped, all traces of amusement replaced by a cold clinical authority that made her physically step back. I do not run a lifestyle blog, Kendra. I run one of the most ruthless and exclusive crisis public relations firms in the country. I am the shadow operative that billionaires, politicians, and elite corporate executives call when they are facing federal indictments, massive public scandals, or total financial ruin. I watched the realization hit Darius first. His eyes widened as the pieces began to click into place. He suddenly remembered the times I had casually predicted market shifts, the times I had accurately forecasted corporate mergers at family dinners. I clean up the devastating messes of the ultra-rich. I continued, my gaze sweeping over DeAndre, who was now trembling visibly. I scrub internet footprints. I kill negative press stories before they ever reach the news desks. I negotiate non-disclosure agreements that cost more than your brother's entire imaginary net worth. I keep my identity entirely hidden behind corporate shells and layered LLCs because my clients demand absolute discretion. The only reason I allowed DeAndre to pretend he was the sole provider was because playing the role of a clueless dependent housewife was the perfect cover story for my actual operations. It kept my profile completely untraceable. I make more money from a single monthly retainer than DeAndre makes in 5 years of fetching coffee for the senior partners at Crescent Wealth. I am not the anchor dragging him down. I am the invisible shield that has been protecting his pathetic, fragile ego for a decade. DeAndre shook his head wildly, rejecting the reality that his entire sense of superiority was a carefully constructed lie I had allowed him to believe. "You are lying," he spat, his voice cracking. "You do not make that kind of money. You are just saying this to save face in front of Vanessa." I pulled my sleek black tablet from my tote bag and unlocked the screen with a quick tap. "You want to talk about money, DeAndre?" I asked, my voice echoing with lethal precision. "Let us talk about your $500,000 salary. Let us pull back the curtain and show your precious influencer exactly what kind of top-tier executive she is currently dating." I swiped open a heavily encrypted financial dossier I had compiled over the last month. "You do not bring home $500,000 a year, DeAndre. Your base salary is $180,000. You only hit that $500,000 mark once 3 years ago, when you got lucky on a single bonus structure that you immediately blew on aggressive margin trading. Currently, your primary checking account at Bank of America, ending in 4209, has a balance of exactly $2,412. Vanessa gasped, stepping away from DeAndre again, as if the lack of funds was physically contagious. He lunged forward, trying to grab the tablet, but I smoothly stepped out of his reach. "Let us look at your liabilities," I continued, reading from the glowing screen. "You owe $45,000 in credit card debt across 5 accounts. You owe $80,000 in outstanding personal loans to 3 different incredibly shady offshore lenders because you have a severe gambling addiction that you desperately try to mask as day trading. That shiny new Porsche sitting in my driveway is not paid off. You leased it under a predatory financing plan that consumes 20% of your actual monthly take-home pay." I turned my gaze directly to Vanessa, who looked like she was about to faint. "And that luxury penthouse he supposedly bought for you downtown. He did not buy it, Vanessa. He is renting it on a month-to-month lease using a hard money loan with a variable interest rate that is going to completely bankrupt him by December. He has no elite investment portfolios or corporate stock options. When you deduct his massive gambling losses, his predatory car leases, and his desperate attempts to buy your affection, his actual net worth is negative $300,000. DeAndre let out a guttural yell, grabbing his head. Kendra covered her mouth, staring at her brother in horror as his black elite status was violently stripped away. "He is absolutely broke, Vanessa," I stated, delivering the final blow. "He is a drowning man, wearing an expensive suit, holding onto a pile of debt. He has absolutely nothing of value left to offer you or anyone else." The crushing reality of my words hung in the grand foyer like a suffocating weight. Vanessa stared at DeAndre, her meticulously contoured face contorted in absolute revulsion. She took another large step back, clutching her designer purse to her chest, as if his financial ruin was a physical disease she might catch. Kendra remained frozen by the marble island, her mouth slightly open, unable to formulate a single coherent defense for the brother she had just praised as a financial titan. Darius suddenly looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one expensive leather shoe to the other. I did not let the silence linger for long. I locked my eyes onto DeAndre, who was now sweating profusely, his confident posture entirely shattered. "But this brings us to a very interesting mathematical dilemma, DeAndre," I said, my voice dangerously calm and measured. "If your bank accounts are completely empty, and your credit is entirely maxed out from your pathetic gambling losses, how exactly did you fund these recent extravagant lifestyle upgrades?" I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. He instinctively backed away, bumping into the edge of a velvet armchair. I looked directly at Vanessa. "You see, Vanessa, the luxury penthouse lease requires a massive upfront cash deposit. And Kendra, I turned my gaze to my sister-in-law, who immediately stiffened under my scrutiny. I could not help but notice that gleaming new sports car parked aggressively in my circular driveway. A custom build paid entirely in cash just last week. I tilted my head, watching the sheer panic rise in my husband's eyes. So, DeAndre, I continued projecting my voice so every single person in the room could hear the trap snapping shut. If your net worth is negative $300,000 and you cannot even afford to pay your rent to my holding company, where exactly did you get hundreds of thousands of dollars in pure liquid cash to impress your mistress and buy your sister a luxury vehicle? DeAndre turned the color of chalk. The remaining blood drained completely from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the bright chandelier lights. His mouth opened, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He looked wildly around the room, desperately searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. His eyes darted to Darius, seeking backup from his corporate subordinate, but Darius immediately looked down at the floor, completely refusing to make eye contact. "Answer the question, DeAndre," I demanded, my tone slicing through the humid air of the foyer. "Where did the money come from?" He swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. He shook his head slightly, holding up a trembling hand in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I cannot," he whispered, his voice cracking pitifully. "I cannot say it, Sienna. Please just stop." He was begging now, completely stripped of his arrogant elite persona. But I had no intention of stopping. I had built an entire career on uncovering buried secrets, and I was about to excavate his deepest, darkest lie right in front of his audience. "Since you have suddenly lost your ability to speak, I will gladly explain the math for everyone," I announced. I reached back into my structured leather tote bag, moving with the precise confidence of a predator that had successfully cornered its prey. I pulled out a thick, heavily redacted bank file. I dropped it onto the marble island right next to the certified property deed. The heavy thud made Kendra flinch visibly. "This file contains the answer to our little financial mystery," I stated, resting my hand flat against the glossy cover. 2 weeks ago, DeAndre walked into a branch of a major national bank. He sat down with a lending officer and initiated a massive cash-out refinance loan against the equity of this exact Buckhead mansion. He confidently requested $800,000 in liquid capital. Vanessa gasped loudly, covering her mouth. Kendra stared at the folder, her eyes widening as the catastrophic reality began to dawn on her. Darius took a sharp breath, his financial background allowing him to process the terrifying implications before anyone else in the room. But there was a massive problem with his brilliant plan. I continued, my gaze locked onto DeAndre's terrified face. "As we have already established, DeAndre does not own this estate. Onyx Holdings owns this estate. And as the sole proprietor of Onyx Holdings, my legal signature is required on any document attempting to leverage this property for capital." DeAndre knew this. He knew he was legally just a tenant, but his desperate need to maintain his facade of generational wealth blinded him to the basic boundaries of the law. I flipped open the heavy file and pulled out a high-resolution color copy of the final loan authorization document. I held it up so the bright overhead lights illuminated the ink. He assumed I was just a clueless, dependent housewife who spent her days writing silly blog posts. He assumed I would never check the county property records or audit my holding company, so he made a spectacularly arrogant decision. I pointed to the bottom of the page right next to the official bank notary stamp. DeAndre intentionally and maliciously forged my signature, I declared, my voice echoing sharply. He fabricated a fraudulent power of attorney, claiming he had the legal right to bind Onyx Holdings in a financial contract. He sat in that bank, looked a loan officer directly in the eye, and signed my name to steal $800,000 against a property he did not own. He used that stolen money to secure a penthouse for a mistress and buy a sports car for a sister who actively despises me. DeAndre's legs finally gave out. He collapsed onto the expensive velvet armchair, his head buried in his hands, letting out a loud, ragged sob. He was completely broken, his facade entirely destroyed by a single piece of paper. "You forged her signature," Darius whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of absolute disgust and rising panic. "DeAndre, you forged corporate documents on a commercial loan. Are you completely out of your mind?" I am so glad you recognize the severity of the situation, Darius, I said, turning my attention to the sweating financial analyst. Because as a licensed professional managing institutional wealth, you should intimately understand exactly what kind of legal territory your brother-in-law just blindly walked into. This is not a simple domestic dispute over hidden credit card debt. This is not a messy divorce argument over joint checking accounts. I stepped away from the kitchen island, pacing slowly across the foyer with absolute lethal precision. I looked directly at DeAndre, who was rocking back and forth in the armchair, sobbing pathetically into his hands. When you use fraudulent documents to secure a loan from a federally insured financial institution, you elevate your petty theft into a massive federal crime. I explained, my voice devoid of any warmth or mercy. You crossed state lines with those funds, making it a wire fraud issue. You submitted fabricated corporate authorizations, making it aggravated identity theft. I paused, letting the heavy silence amplify the weight of my words. Because Onyx Holdings is a registered corporate entity, your actions fall under the jurisdiction of federal investigators. You committed federal bank fraud, DeAndre. You intentionally defrauded a protected institution out of nearly $1 million. Vanessa let out a small, terrified whimper, pressing herself flat against the front door, trying to physically distance herself from the man she had proudly claimed as her elite prize just 20 minutes ago. Kendra was shaking so violently, her heavy gold bracelets rattled against each other in the quiet room. The federal government does not care about your impressive job title, I continued, stating the facts with cold, calculating clarity. They do not care about your bespoke suits or your country club memberships. They only care about the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. Federal bank fraud carries a maximum penalty of 30 years in federal prison and a fine of up to $1 million per count. And because you executed the wire transfers to pay for the penthouse and the sports car, you have added multiple counts of wire fraud which carry another 20 years each. The temperature in the grand foyer seemed to plummet to absolute zero. The air grew incredibly thin, suffocating the arrogance out of every single toxic person standing in my home. DeAndre let out a loud, agonizing wail, dropping to his knees on the custom rug he had threatened to throw in the garbage. He grabbed the fabric of his expensive trousers, weeping hysterically as the reality of a 30-year federal prison sentence crushed his spirit completely. You thought you could kick me out of my own home and leave me with a pathetic $5,000 pity check, I said, looking down at the broken man sobbing at my feet. You thought you were an untouchable titan of the black elite, but you are just a common thief who stole from his own wife to impress a superficial mistress. And you are going to lose absolutely everything. Section 7. The gaslighting and the ego. Death word count. Allocation 1,500 words. DeAndre slowly pushed himself up from the floor, his expensive bespoke suit now wrinkled and pathetic looking. The loud sobbing stopped, replaced by a desperate, calculated shift in his entire demeanor. He wiped his face, dragging his hands over his eyes as he frantically tried to construct a new mask. He realized he could not intimidate me anymore, so he instantly pivoted to playing the ultimate victim. He looked up at me with wide, pleading eyes, attempting to weaponize the very wedding vows he had just tried to shatter. "Sienna, please," he begged, his voice trembling with manufactured sincerity. "You have to understand why I did it. You have to understand the immense crushing pressure I am under every single day. I am a black man operating in the absolute highest tiers of corporate Atlanta. Do you have any idea what it takes to survive in that ruthless environment? I have to walk into boardrooms filled with generational wealth and project absolute flawless invincibility. If I show even a fraction of a financial struggle, if I let those senior partners see me sweat, they will tear me apart and replace me before lunchtime. I have to work twice as hard to get half the respect they hand out to everyone else. I have to maintain the aesthetic of a top-tier executive just to keep my seat at the table." He stepped closer, his eyes wide and pleading, trying to leverage our shared history and culture. "You know how hard it is out there, Sienna," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a desperate, frantic whisper. "You know the impossible standards placed on black executives in this city. When the market shifted and my personal investments tanked, I panicked. I could not let the firm see me fail. I could not become another statistic, another stereotype of a black man who fumbled his wealth. I leveraged the house to keep the illusion alive to protect my career. I did it for us, Sienna. I did it to build a legacy for Trey. He completely ignored Vanessa, now treating her like invisible trash as he frantically tried to save his own skin. Vanessa was just a prop. He insisted, waving his hand dismissively toward the front door where she cowered. She was a superficial accessory. In my ruthless corporate circles, the top executives parade around with lifestyle trophies to project dominance. It was a sick game I played to blend in with the arrogant culture of the firm. But you are my wife. You are the mother of my black son. You cannot tear down this family. You cannot hand a successful black father over to the federal authorities. You know exactly what the justice system does to black men, Sienna. They will lock me away and throw away the key. You are going to let a simple financial mistake destroy a prominent black family. Think about the optics. Think about our son growing up with his father in a federal penitentiary. He dropped back down to his knees, grabbing the hem of my skirt. You are always so distant from the corporate scene, Sienna, he cried, trying to subtly shift the blame onto my shoulders. You hid behind your computer screen and refused to play the high society game with me. I felt like I had to carry the entire weight of our social standing alone. I had to project wealth because you would not stand by my side at the country club. I made a massive error in judgment, but I only forged that document to shield you from the shame of losing the Buckhead mansion. Fix this for your husband. Fix this for your son. Show some loyalty to your own people and protect me from the feds. I looked down at the man clutching my skirt and I felt absolutely nothing but profound disgust. I stepped backward, pulling the fabric from his sweaty, trembling hands. Do not you dare try to weaponize the struggles of black men to justify your pathetic greed, I stated, my voice resonating with cold, lethal authority. Do not you dare invoke the systemic issues of the justice system to shield yourself from the consequences of your own deliberate criminal actions. You are not a martyr, DeAndre. You are not a victim of a cutthroat corporate culture. You are a narcissist who wanted to play pretend with money you did not earn. I paced in front of him, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. You want to talk about the pressures of being black in corporate America? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You think you are the only one who has to work twice as hard. I built an entire crisis management firm from nothing. I sit in rooms with global power players who constantly underestimate me because I am a black woman. But I never compromised my integrity to secure my seat at the table. True success in this world is built on relentless hard work, undeniable competence, and absolute integrity. It is not built on leasing sports cars you cannot afford or parading around a 26-year-old influencer to impress a bunch of superficial finance bros. I pointed a finger directly at his tear-stained face. You claim you did this to protect a successful black family. But a true protector does not forge his wife's signature to steal $800,000 from her hidden assets. A real man building a legacy does not siphon funds meant for his son's future to pay for a luxury penthouse for a mistress who just called his actual home cheap. You did not do any of this for me or for Trey. You did it entirely for your own massive, fragile ego. You wanted the applause. You wanted the envy of your peers. You wanted to feel like a titan while completely lacking the discipline required to actually become one. I paused, letting the absolute truth of his failure crush him deeper into the rug. And the most sickening part of your entire defense, DeAndre, is that you decided to fund your fake elite lifestyle by stealing directly from a black woman. You looked at the wealth I quietly secured. You saw the safety net I built to keep a roof over your son's head, and you decided to exploit it so you could play sugar daddy to a woman who only wanted your credit limit. You brought her to my doorstep tonight. You handed me divorce papers and tried to kick me out into the street with a pathetic $5,000 check. You were perfectly willing to leave the mother of your child completely destitute just an hour ago. You were ready to throw me to the wolves to elevate your aesthetic. And now that you are the one facing the wolves, you have the audacity to beg me for loyalty. I looked over at Kendra, who had been so incredibly vocal just a few minutes ago. She was staring at her brother with her mouth hanging open, completely unable to process the absolute destruction of his elite image. She had bragged about his status, and now she was watching him beg on his knees like a common thief caught in a lie. Darius was wiping his forehead with an expensive silk handkerchief, his eyes darting frantically toward the front door as if he was already planning his own desperate escape route. He knew that being associated with a federal crime could completely terminate his own career at Crescent Wealth. And Vanessa, the so-called lifestyle influencer who had demanded I leave my own house, was now pressing herself against the mahogany doorframe, looking like a terrified child who had just realized the fairy tale she was sold was actually a nightmare. "You all walked into my home thinking you held the ultimate power," I said, my voice carrying across the silent foyer. "You thought you could humiliate me and discard me because you believed your superficial status made you untouchable." I leaned down slightly, lowering my voice to a sharp, deadly whisper directed right at my husband. "You lost the right to ask for my loyalty the second you forged my name on those commercial loan documents. You lost the right to invoke our family the moment you brought Vanessa onto my porch to help you throw my belongings into garbage bags. You are not facing federal prison because the system is rigged against black men. You are facing federal prison because you committed federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. You made those choices with a clear mind and a greedy heart. You signed the documents, you took the money, you bought the cars, and now you will serve the time." I stood back up, watching him physically deflate, as every single one of his manipulative excuses was systematically annihilated. He had no moral high ground left to stand on. His ego was completely executed, stripped bare for everyone in the room to witness. Kendra stood silently by the kitchen island, unable to defend him anymore. Darius was sweating heavily, recognizing that his brother-in-law was legally and morally radioactive. Vanessa was still cowering near the door, realizing that the powerful executive she had worshipped was actually the weakest man in the room. "You thought you could gaslight me into saving you," I continued, my tone devoid of any sympathy whatsoever. "You thought you could use my success to clean up the catastrophic mess you made of your own life. But my crisis management services are reserved for paying clients who tell me the truth. You are just a delinquent tenant and a common criminal. I will not lift a single finger to save you from the absolute ruin you orchestrated for yourself. Your facade is completely dead, DeAndre. The elite society you desperately wanted to impress is going to watch you be carried out of this neighborhood in handcuffs. And I am going to happily watch it happen with a massive smile on my face." Section 8. Darius Strikes Back. The Empty Threat. Word count allocation 1,500 words. The heavy silence that followed my declaration was abruptly broken by the sound of Darius clearing his throat. The financial analyst had spent the last 10 minutes sweating and shrinking into the background, but now a different calculation was running behind his eyes. He stepped directly over DeAndre, who was still crumpled on the floor in a pathetic heap. Darius violently yanked at the lapels of his custom blazer, attempting to physically reconstruct his shattered corporate authority. He had realized that if DeAndre went down for federal bank fraud, the resulting investigation would inevitably tear through the executive suites of Crescent Wealth. Darius could not care less about his brother-in-law going to prison, but he cared deeply about his own lucrative career and his proximity to absolute power. He marched toward the kitchen island, planting his hands firmly on the marble surface, and leaned toward me with a menacing glare. "Listen to me very carefully, Sienna," Darius growled, his voice dropping an octave as he attempted to project the raw intimidation he usually reserved for hostile boardroom negotiations. "You have had your fun tonight. You put on a great theatrical performance and you successfully embarrassed DeAndre in front of his little girlfriend. But the show ends right now. You are not going to call the federal authorities, you are not going to file any fraud charges, and you are certainly not going to drag the name of Crescent Wealth into a messy public scandal." I raised a single eyebrow, maintaining my perfectly calm posture. "And who exactly is going to stop me, Darius? You are just a junior executive pretending to be a mastermind." "I am," he fired back, striking his chest with his thumb. "I am going to stop you using the full, unlimited weight of the Crescent Wealth Legal Department. You clearly do not comprehend the magnitude of the corporate beast you are threatening to poke. Our firm retains the most ruthless, bloodthirsty corporate litigators on the entire eastern seaboard. These men do not practice family law. They do not handle petty domestic disputes. They specialize in financial obliteration. If you even attempt to take that folder to the authorities, I will personally march into our general counsel office tomorrow morning and instruct them to unleash absolute hell on your little holding company." He slammed his fist against the marble. "We will bury Onyx Holdings in an avalanche of aggressive litigation. We will file injunctions against every single asset you own. We will tie up your bank accounts, freeze your real estate portfolio, completely block your access to your own capital, and drain every single dollar you have carefully saved in astronomical, devastating legal fees that will leave you absolutely broke. You think you are smart because you hid a house under an LLC. Our lawyers dismantle complex corporate structures before their morning coffee. They will pierce your corporate veil, drag your name through the mud, and sue you into absolute oblivion for defamation and corporate sabotage. We will publicly claim you maliciously fabricated this entire false narrative to illegally extort a respected senior executive out of pure bitter jealousy." Darius took a step closer, trying to tower over me. "You are threatening a vice president of a multi-billion-dollar investment fund. Do you have any idea how fast we can make a problem like you disappear? We have judges on our speed dial. We have partners who play golf with the federal prosecutors you think you are going to call. The system protects Capital Siena. It protects us. You are a single black woman trying to fight an institution. If you walk out that door with that evidence, I promise you that by tomorrow morning, you will not even have a checking account left to your name." Hearing her husband assert his corporate dominance seemed to instantly resurrect Kendra from her state of panicked paralysis. The terror that had previously drained the color from her face was suddenly replaced by a renewed toxic arrogance. She practically shoved Vanessa out of the way as she strutted back over to her husband's side. Her heavy designer jewelry clattered loudly as she crossed her arms, mirroring Darius' aggressive stance. "You better listen to my husband." Sienna Kendra spat, her voice dripping with the familiar elitist venom she had weaponized against me for the past 10 years. "You really thought you could outsmart us just because you run some glorified event planning service for rich people with bad manners? You do crisis public relations. That is just fancy babysitting. You write generic press releases, send desperate emails, and beg journalists not to publish bad photos of minor celebrities. Do not confuse your little customer service job with actual institutional power." She leaned over the counter, pointing a sharp acrylic nail directly at my face. "You serve the wealthy, Sienna. We are the wealth. Crescent Wealth manages over $40 billion in institutional assets. We dictate global market trends and control the immense wealth of entire generational dynasties. We fund entire political campaigns. Our firm handles the retirement portfolios for massive corporations and foreign dignitaries. Wall Street money does not bow down to a public relations consultant who works out of a home office. You are entirely out of your league." Darius nodded emphatically, feeding off his wife's renewed aggression. "Exactly. You operate in the shadows because you have no real power of your own. You just clean up the messes. We create the economy. If you genuinely think your pathetic little PR firm can actually survive a direct, aggressive legal assault from Crescent Wealth, you are completely delusional and incredibly naive. We will contact every single one of your clients. We will inform them that you are unstable, vindictive, and currently under investigation for corporate espionage. We will destroy your professional reputation so thoroughly that you will never work in this industry again. You will be blacklisted across the entire country." Kendra let out a harsh, mocking laugh, looking down at DeAndre, who was still shivering on the floor. "Get up, DeAndre," she snapped, kicking his expensive shoe with her heel. "Stop crying like a weak child. Darius is handling this. We are handling this." She turned her furious gaze back to me. "You are going to give us that certified deed, and you are going to hand over that entire folder of bank records right now. You are going to sign a non-disclosure agreement drafted by our lawyers, legally preventing you from ever speaking a single word about this mortgage or this loan to anyone. In exchange, we will let you walk away with the $5,000 DeAndre generously offered you earlier. We will even let you pack your bags peacefully instead of throwing them out on the lawn. But if you refuse, we will financially execute you by dawn." The sheer, unadulterated delusion radiating from the two of them was truly spectacular to witness. They were standing in my house, threatening me with legal ruin, while blatantly attempting to cover up a federal crime committed by their own family member. They were so deeply intoxicated by their proximity to Wall Street money that they genuinely believed their corporate badges made them invincible. They honestly thought they could easily bully me into handing over the key evidence of a massive federal bank fraud just by aggressively tossing around legal buzzwords like injunctions, endless litigation, and corporate sabotage. Darius slammed his hand on the counter again, demanding my immediate compliance. Hand over the physical folder, Sienna. Right now. Give me the original bank documents and the property deed. If you do not hand them over to me within the next 60 seconds, I am calling our general counsel and initiating the first wave of lawsuits. You are going to lose this house anyway once we tie it up in litigation. Save yourself the overwhelming public embarrassment, the inevitable financial ruin, and the total absolute bankruptcy. Hand over the evidence. Kendra stepped even closer, her eyes burning with sheer entitlement. You have always been a stubborn, ungrateful woman, she hissed. We gave you the privilege of carrying our family name, and you repay us by trying to destroy my brother. You are nothing compared to us. We belong to the most elite circles in Atlanta, and you are just a temporary mistake we are currently rectifying. Give my powerful husband the damn folder right now. You have absolutely no other choice. Vanessa, who had been silently watching the entire exchange from the safety of the front doorway, suddenly found her voice again. Yes, Sienna, she piped up, trying to insert herself back into the winning team. You heard them. They have billions of dollars behind them. You are going to end up in jail yourself if you try to fight a massive investment firm. Just give them the papers and leave so we can all move on with our lives. I stood perfectly still, letting the chaotic symphony of their arrogant threats wash over me. I did not reach for the folder. I did not take a single step backward. I just looked at Darius, who was breathing heavily, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of finance bro dominance. I looked at Kendra, who was glaring at me with the absolute certainty that her social status made her a god. I looked at Vanessa, who was foolishly trying to cling to the sinking ship she had just desperately tried to abandon. They had just proudly laid out their entire strategy. They had explicitly threatened to use their corporate resources to ruin my life. They had demanded I surrender the evidence of a federal crime under the threat of malicious litigation. They had handed me the final pieces of the puzzle, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were all entirely complicit in protecting a criminal operation. I slowly reached out and placed my hand flat on top of the manila folder. The cool, smooth paper rested firmly beneath my palm. They watched my hand, expecting me to slide the documents across the marble island. They expected me to immediately and completely surrender without a fight. Their loud, aggressive bullying was supposed to force my immediate compliance. I tapped my fingers against the folder and let a slow, icy smile spread across my face. My gaze shifted from Darius to Kendra, and then down to DeAndre. You truly have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. I did not raise my voice to match Darius. The volume of their desperation was deafening, but my absolute silence was far more lethal. I slowly lifted my hand off the manila folder and reached back into my structured leather tote bag. Darius was still panting heavily. He honestly believed his aggressive posturing had finally forced me into submission. I let him bask in that pathetic delusion for exactly 5 more seconds. My fingers curled around the cold aluminum casing of my iPad Pro. I pulled the sleek device out of my bag and held it up. The dark screen reflected the bright lights of the chandelier above us. I did not utter a single word as I tapped the screen to wake it up. Kendra crossed her arms tightly, her heavy jewelry clanking again. "What are you doing?" she snapped, her voice shrill with impatience. I completely ignored her. I swiped my finger across the glass, unlocking the device with smooth, deliberate precision. I tapped the screen-sharing icon located in the upper right corner of my control center. I turned my body away from the marble kitchen island and looked directly at the massive 85-inch smart television mounted on the custom stone wall in the center of the living room. It was the television Vanessa had just loudly declared she wanted to throw in the garbage. A soft electronic chime echoed through the grand foyer. The massive black screen of the television instantly flickered to life. The sudden bright illumination cast a harsh blue glow across the luxurious room. illuminating the panicked faces of my husband, his mistress, his sister, and his brother-in-law. The television screen mirrored my exact iPad display. I had cast my highly secure corporate email inbox directly onto the giant monitor for every single person in the room to see clearly. The font was large, crisp, and completely undeniable. Darius frowned deeply, his thick eyebrows furrowing as he tried to comprehend what I was doing. "What kind of stupid game are you playing, Sienna?" he demanded, taking a threatening step toward me. "You think showing us your pathetic little inbox is going to stop the legal department at Crescent Wealth from destroying you?" "I am not playing a game, Darius." I finally answered, my voice vibrating with a chilling calm that forced him to stop dead in his tracks. "I am giving you a visual representation of exactly how much power your beloved investment firm actually holds." I tapped the screen once more, opening a specific encrypted email thread. The header of the email expanded to fill the entire television. I watched the arrogant sneer on Darius' face slowly morph into an expression of profound, catastrophic confusion. He squinted at the giant screen, reading the sender address aloud. "Why do you have an email thread from Vanguard Pinnacle Capital?" Vanguard Pinnacle Capital was not just any standard investment group. They were the undisputed giants of the institutional finance sector, handling generational wealth that dwarfed everyday corporate funds. Seeing their name plastered across my living room television was the very last thing Darius ever expected. His corporate armor began to show its first fatal crack as the bright blue light illuminated his sweating forehead. I turned back to Darius, my posture radiating absolute control. "You and DeAndre love to boast about the billions of dollars Crescent Wealth manages," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the foyer. "You stand in my house and threaten me with the immense power of your institutional assets. You brag about how your firm dictates global market trends and controls the wealth of dynasties, but you fundamentally misunderstand how the financial ecosystem actually operates. Crescent Wealth does not generate that money out of thin air, Darius. Your entire firm is essentially a glorified storage locker for larger, much more powerful entities, and every storage locker relies entirely on its anchor tenant to keep the lights open." Darius swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically from the giant television screen back to my face. Kendra looked at her husband, her toxic arrogance faltering as she noticed the genuine fear creeping into his posture. "What is she talking about, Darius?" Kendra whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "Why is she talking about Vanguard Pinnacle Capital?" I did not let Darius answer her. I answered it for him. "Vanguard Pinnacle Capital is the apex predator of your financial ecosystem, Kendra." I explained, never breaking eye contact with Darius. "They are the single largest institutional backer keeping Crescent Wealth afloat. According to the internal financial audits I access daily, Vanguard Pinnacle Capital provides exactly 60% of the total managed funds sitting in Crescent Wealth portfolios. Without their capital, your prestigious firm is absolutely nothing. Without their massive continued investment, your billionaire partners cannot afford their private jets. Your legal department cannot afford to tie up my holding company, and you certainly cannot afford your inflated salary." Darius took a stumbling step backward, his back hitting the edge of the velvet sofa. He knew the numbers were entirely accurate. He knew that the loss of that specific anchor client would mean the instant total annihilation of his entire company. But what he could not fathom was how a public relations consultant had direct access to that information. I smiled, a cold, ruthless smile that made him physically shudder. "You mocked my career, Darius. You called me a glorified babysitter for rich people with bad manners. You completely underestimated the magnitude of my influence. You see, Vanguard Pinnacle Capital is controlled by a private board of directors who absolutely despise negative press. And the chairman of that board happens to be my most exclusive crisis PR client. I handle his personal scandals. I manage his international reputation. I advise him on exactly which partnerships present a toxic liability to his pristine public image. I do not just write press releases, Darius. I dictate where the real money flows based on the reputational risk assessments I provide." And when I discovered what my husband was doing with your active assistance, I realized that Crescent Wealth was a massive radioactive liability. You threatened to ruin my life by mourning Darius, but you failed to realize that I hold the leash to the very monster that feeds you. The color completely drained from Darius' face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell. He finally comprehended the terrifying reality that my silent power vastly superseded his loud corporate posturing. I looked down at my iPad and tapped the screen one final time. I scrolled down to the email body. "Look at the screen, Darius," I commanded, my voice echoing off the high ceilings with absolute authority. "Read the directive my client sent to your board." Darius turned his head, locking onto the glowing blue text. The email was time-stamped exactly 1 hour ago, right as DeAndre cornered me with divorce papers. I read the bold crimson text aloud, forcing everyone to digest their ruin. Due to undeniable evidence of executive embezzlement, Vanguard Pinnacle Capital is executing an immediate total withdrawal of all managed assets. Funds must be liquidated and transferred immediately. We do not partner with fraudulent institutions. The living room went dead silent. Darius' legs buckled. He collapsed onto the sofa, gripping his head. "Do you understand, Darius?" I asked in a lethal whisper. "Withdrawing 60% of your managed assets causes an instantaneous fatal liquidity crisis. I just single-handedly triggered a catastrophic bank run. Tomorrow morning, your billionaire partners will wake up to a financial nightmare. Your legal department will be too busy fighting federal regulators to file any injunctions against me. By noon, Crescent Wealth will be insolvent. You will have no job and no elite status. You threatened to financially execute me by dawn, but I vaporized your entire livelihood before you even pulled into my driveway." Kendra let out a horrified shriek, rushing to Darius and shaking him. "Tell me, she is lying!" Darius, Kendra screamed. "Tell me our money is safe." Darius did not look at his wife. He stared blankly at the massive television screen, watching his entire elite universe burn to the ground in bright blue pixels. He slowly shook his head, his voice a broken, devastated whisper. "It is gone, Kendra. Everything is completely gone. The firm is dead. We are absolutely ruined." The financial nuke had detonated, leveling the arrogant foundation they had proudly stood upon, leaving them with nothing. Vanessa stood frozen by the doorway, her mouth hanging open in sheer terror. She had wanted to attach herself to wealth, but instead, she had walked straight into a financial bloodbath. DeAndre remained on the floor, sobbing quietly, unable to even look at the television screen that confirmed his utter destruction. My retaliation was swift, absolute, and utterly irreversible. Darius slowly slid off the edge of the velvet sofa until his knees hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. The sheer magnitude of the devastation had completely hollowed him out. He stared blankly at the marble tiles, his chest heaving as if the oxygen had been entirely sucked out of the room. But I was not finished. A crisis management operative never stops midway through an operation. Total neutralization is the only acceptable outcome. I stepped toward Darius, looking down at the man who had just proudly threatened to bury me in corporate litigation. "You might be wondering why my client pulled their massive investment so abruptly, Darius," I said, my voice slicing through the sounds of DeAndre, pathetic sobbing. "Institutional investors do not just trigger a catastrophic bank run on a whim. They require ironclad, absolute proof of severe internal corruption." I tapped the screen of my iPad again, bringing up a new document on the massive television. A complex web of financial flowcharts and highlighted bank statements materialized in bright blue and crimson. I spent the last 3 weeks conducting a deep forensic audit of Crescent Wealth internal ledgers. I continued pacing methodically across the grand foyer. My client granted me unprecedented access to trace anomalies in their portfolio returns. What I found was a sophisticated but ultimately sloppy system of financial siphoning. DeAndre has been actively embezzling capital directly from the firm operating accounts for the past 14 months. He was systematically skimming fractions of percentages off massive institutional trades and redirecting that capital into shadow accounts to fund his fake elite lifestyle. Darius looked up, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He shook his head weakly, attempting to deny the glaring evidence projected on the screen above him. DeAndre could not do that alone. Darius stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He does not have the administrative clearance to bypass the internal security protocols. You are right, Darius, I replied, offering a sharp, humorless smile. DeAndre is far too incompetent to orchestrate a high-level embezzlement scheme by himself. He absolutely needed an accomplice with top-tier administrative access. He needed a senior analyst who could manipulate the quarterly compliance reports and blindly authorize the illicit transfers without flagging the internal audit department. He needed someone deeply embedded in the system who was arrogant enough to believe they would never get caught. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Darius. He needed you. The flowchart on the television zoomed in, highlighting specific routing numbers. I tracked the stolen capital leaving the firm. I explained, my tone completely devoid of mercy. DeAndre did not just transfer the embezzled funds into his own checking account. That would trigger an immediate investigation from the Internal Revenue Service. He needed to wash the money first. So he routed every single stolen dollar through your personal offshore portfolios, Darius. He used your heavily encrypted accounts in the Cayman Islands as a digital laundromat to hide the stolen capital from the federal government and to hide it from me. You facilitated the exact theft that triggered the collapse of your entire firm. You watched him siphon wealth from your clients, and you actively provided the digital camouflage to protect his reckless greed. You thought you were untouchable because you hid behind offshore firewalls and complex corporate jargon. But digital footprints never truly vanish, Darius, especially when someone like me knows exactly where to shine the spotlight. The money trail is explicitly clear, and it leads directly from Crescent Wealth operating accounts right into your personal financial portfolio. Kendra let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying to her throat as she looked back and forth between her husband and her brother. Darius, you did not... She shrieked, her voice cracking with pure terror. Tell me you did not help him steal from the firm. Darius remained frozen on his knees, completely unable to defend himself against the undeniable truth displayed on the screen. He had leveraged his entire career to play a dangerous game, and he had lost everything. Yes, Kendra, he absolutely did, I answered for her, taking another step closer to the devastated couple. And you directly benefited from that exact stolen money. I switched the display on the television one more time, bringing up the purchase records for the luxury assets they had proudly flaunted. You see, Darius did not just hold the embezzled funds in his offshore accounts. He actively distributed the laundered money back into the domestic economy to fund DeAndre's pathetic midlife crisis. Darius executed the wire transfer that paid the massive upfront cash deposit on Vanessa Luxury downtown penthouse. Darius authorized the offshore withdrawal that purchased your brand new custom sports car, Kendra. You have been driving around Atlanta in a vehicle funded entirely by stolen corporate capital. Vanessa let out a loud, panicked wail from her spot near the front door. She pressed her hands against the sides of her head, hyperventilating as the terrifying reality of her situation crystallized. She had demanded a life of luxury, and she was now firmly tethered to a massive criminal conspiracy. You processed the transactions, Darius stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. You moved stolen money across international borders to purchase domestic real estate and luxury vehicles. By actively helping DeAndre hide those stolen funds, you are no longer just an innocent bystander or a negligent employee. You are a direct accessory to high-level corporate embezzlement and massive international money laundering. You conspired to defraud your own clients, to steal from your own employer, and to launder the proceeds through the global banking system. You thought you were demonstrating your financial dominance today, but all you really did was provide the paper trail that proves your profound criminal complicity. Every single expensive dinner, every designer suit, every arrogant boast about shifting millions of dollars was entirely funded by your willingness to act as a financial mule for your desperate brother-in-law. You threw away your entire lucrative career, your reputation, and your freedom just to help DeAndre impress a 26-year-old influencer. You tied your entire future to his catastrophic failure. You sat in my foyer and mocked my financial literacy while you were actively committing textbook money laundering. You threatened to ruin me with your corporate lawyers while you were systematically stealing the very capital that paid their retainer fees. The sheer magnitude of your arrogance blinded you to the massive legal vulnerability you created for yourself. You thought you were a titan of industry, Darius, but you are just an accessory to a staggeringly obvious crime. I casually reached into my pocket and retrieved my smartphone, breaking my intense glare to glance down at the illuminated screen. A soft chime echoed in the quiet foyer, confirming the successful delivery of a highly encrypted data packet. I looked back up at Darius, who was now trembling so violently his expensive tailored blazer shook. "You threatened to unleash absolute hell on my holding company by tomorrow morning," I said, keeping my tone conversational and light. "You promised to call your general counsel and drag my name through the mud. Unfortunately for you, Darius, you are completely out of time. I did not wait for you to arrive at my house to initiate my counterstrike. Exactly 1 hour ago, while DeAndre was aggressively shoving those pathetic divorce papers into my hands, I authorized the release of my forensic audit. I sent the complete, unredacted dossier outlining your entire offshore money laundering operation directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I also forwarded the exact same comprehensive file to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. They have every single bank statement, every forged signature, every offshore routing number, and every internal email you exchanged with DeAndre coordinating the theft. The federal agents do not need to wait for a subpoena because my client legally surrendered the data as the victim of your massive corporate fraud. The walls of the grand foyer seemed to physically close in on the brother-in-law duo. Darius let out a strangled gasp, clutching his chest as if he were experiencing a massive heart attack. DeAndre remained curled into a tight ball on the floor, weeping uncontrollably into the expensive custom rug. They were completely trapped with absolutely no avenues of escape, and no corporate lawyers left to save them. The federal authorities are likely securing emergency warrants as we speak. I concluded, delivering the final devastating blow. They will freeze your assets, seize your passports, and raid your offices before the sun comes up. You tried to bury me, Darius, but you just dug your own federal grave. Your elite connections cannot save you from the SEC, and your billionaire partners will gladly throw you both under the bus to protect themselves from federal indictment. The luxurious bubble you built on lies and stolen capital has officially popped. You thought you were arriving at this mansion to oversee my humiliating eviction, but you actually walked straight into the final staging ground of your own total destruction. The absolute silence that followed my final declaration was suddenly shattered by a high-pitched guttural scream. The sound did not come from Vanessa or DeAndre. It came from Kendra, the wealthy, polished sister-in-law who had strutted onto my porch, radiating pure elitist venom, was completely gone. In her place stood a woman whose entire meticulously curated universe was actively collapsing around her in real time. Kendra stared at her husband Darius, who was still slumped on the floor, gasping for air like a dying man. Then she slowly turned her head to look at her brother. Her eyes, which had previously been filled with arrogant condescension, were now wide with a frantic, unhinged terror. The heavy gold bracelets on her wrists clanged together violently as her hands balled into tight, shaking fists. "You idiot!" Kendra shrieked, her voice cracking as the full weight of her reality crashed down upon her. "Do you have any idea what you have done, DeAndre? You completely destroyed us. You destroyed everything." She lunged forward, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at his tear-stained face. "Do you honestly think the federal government cares about our family name? Do you think the authorities are going to spare my husband because he works in a fancy office? They are going to freeze our bank accounts tomorrow morning. They are going to seize the custom sports car you just bought me. I'm going to have FBI agents kicking down my front door, tearing through my designer closets, and dragging my husband out in handcuffs in front of the entire neighborhood." DeAndre cowered, trying to scramble backward on the custom rug, but his sister pursued him like a predator scenting blood. "My entire life is over," Kendra screamed, her chest heaving with explosive, panicked breaths. "We belong to the most exclusive social clubs in Atlanta. We sit on the boards of elite charities. Our children attend the most prestigious private academies in the state. And now we are going to be on the evening news as common thieves and money launderers. Every single person in our social circle is going to watch us lose our home, our status, and our freedom. They are going to laugh at us behind our backs while we go completely bankrupt trying to pay federal defense attorneys to keep Darius out of a maximum security penitentiary. She turned her furious gaze toward Vanessa, who was pressing herself against the front door, attempting to become entirely invisible. And you did it all for her. Kendra spat, her voice dripping with pure disgust. You risked your entire career, your freedom, and my husband's life so you could play sugar daddy to a 26-year-old Instagram model who cannot even afford her own rent. You jeopardized the legacy of this entire family to fund a fake lifestyle for a woman who was ready to run out the door the second she realized you were actually broke. You are pathetic, DeAndre. You are weak and you are incredibly stupid. You let your massive, fragile ego dictate your finances, and you dragged my husband down into the dirt right along with you. Kendra was hyperventilating now, her carefully styled hair falling out of place as she marched closer to her brother. I trusted you, DeAndre. Darius trusted you. You told us you had a foolproof plan to get rid of Sienna and upgrade your life. You swore to Darius that the offshore transfers were completely untraceable. You promised him that he would be safe. And now my husband is facing decades in a federal prison because you could not keep your zipper closed and your hands out of the company operating accounts. You completely ruined my life. The sheer force of her rage was palpable. Kendra had built her entire identity around being a wealthy, untouchable elite. Her worst nightmare was not losing her brother, but losing her proximity to power and money. She realized that the luxury vehicles, the expensive vacations, and the high society galas were instantly vaporized. She was staring directly at a future involving frozen assets, public humiliation, and prison visits. Her mind completely snapped under the pressure of her own impending destruction. She could no longer maintain the sophisticated facade of a top-tier executive wife. The polished veneer melted away, leaving only raw, violent fury. Kendra closed the final few feet between them and swung her arm with terrifying speed. The sharp crack of her open palm striking DeAndre across the cheek echoed like a gunshot through the grand foyer. DeAndre let out a yelp of pain, his head snapping to the side from the sheer force of the blow. A bright red handprint instantly bloomed across his skin. He raised his arms in a desperate attempt to shield his face, crying out for her to stop. But Kendra was entirely beyond the point of reason. She swung again, her heavy rings scratching against his jawline. "You ruined my family!" she screamed, launching herself at him and tearing at the collar of his bespoke suit. "You stole my future! You are a criminal and a failure!" DeAndre tried to push her away, shoving her shoulder to create distance. "Get off me, Kendra!" he pleaded, sobbing openly. "I did not mean for this to happen. I thought we were safe. I thought she was just a stupid blogger." The physical shove was the absolute breaking point for Darius. Seeing DeAndre push his wife seemed to instantly snap the financial analyst out of his shock-induced paralysis. The terror that had kept him frozen on the floor suddenly ignited into explosive, blinding rage. Darius let out a feral roar, pushing himself off the hardwood floor. He lunged across the space, covering the distance in a single massive bound. He tackled DeAndre with his entire body weight, sending both men crashing hard onto the marble floor. "I gave you everything," Darius screamed, his voice tearing through the foyer as he pinned DeAndre down by his expensive silk tie. "I risked my licenses. I risked my corporate standing. I risked my entire freedom to help you hide your dirty money. And you were so incredibly incompetent that you let your wife track the offshore routing numbers. You left a digital paper trail leading straight to my front door." Darius pulled his fist back and drove it directly into DeAndre's stomach, winding the breathless executive. DeAndre gasped, choking on his own tears as he tried to pry Darius' heavy hands off his throat. "I am going to lose my firm," Darius roared, shaking DeAndre violently against the floorboards. "I am going to lose my clients. I am going to be blacklisted by the SEC. I managed billions of dollars, DeAndre. I was a respected senior analyst, and now I am going to be a convicted felon because of your sloppy, pathetic arrogance." The foyer dissolved into absolute chaotic violence. Kendra dropped to her knees beside the grappling men, grabbing fistfuls of DeAndre's suit jacket, screaming obscenities about her ruined reputation. Darius threw another punch, catching DeAndre on the shoulder. as the two corporate executives rolled across the floor, tearing at each other with unhinged ferocity. Expensive fabric ripped. Designer shoes kicked frantically against the pristine marble. The heavy breathing, the furious curses, and the sounds of physical struggle completely consumed the space. The polished, successful black elite family had instantly devolved into a desperate, violent street brawl right in the middle of my entryway. I slowly took a step backward, removing myself entirely from the physical danger of their chaotic scuffle. I glided smoothly toward the kitchen island, turning my back on the flying fists and frantic screaming. I placed my hands flat against the cool, smooth marble of the countertop, leaning my weight against the edge. I crossed my ankles, settling into a relaxed, comfortable posture as I watched the spectacular implosion unfold before my eyes. This was the absolute pinnacle of poetic justice. Less than an hour ago, this exact group of people had marched onto my front porch, radiating supreme authority. They had sneered at me, demeaned my intelligence, and demanded I pack my belongings into garbage bags. They had proudly boasted about their untouchable wealth, their corporate titles, and their societal superiority. They had fully intended to physically remove me from my own property and leave me destitute on the streets of Atlanta. Now they were physically tearing each other to pieces on the very floor they had just tried to kick me off of. The heavy-duty black trash bags Kendra had aggressively thrust into my hands were still lying crumpled on the rug right next to where she was currently screaming at her brother. They had brought those bags to throw away my life, but instead they were taking out the trash themselves. The irony was incredibly delicious. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for any of them. I simply observed them with cold, calculated detachment. DeAndre was bleeding from a scratch on his cheek, his luxury suit completely ruined. Darius was red-faced and sweating, screaming until his vocal cords gave out. Kendra was weeping hysterically, mourning the death of her social calendar while she clawed at her own brother. They had built an entire empire on lies, fraud, and deceitful manipulation. They had climbed to the top of the social ladder by stepping on the backs of everyone around them, including me. But gravity is an absolute law of nature. And when you build a heavy glass house on a foundation of stolen money, the eventual collapse is always spectacular. I did not have to raise my voice. I did not have to throw a single punch. I just provided the undeniable truth and let their own overwhelming greed and profound selfishness do the rest of the work. I leaned comfortably against my marble counter, sipping the air of my quiet victory, watching the elite, untouchable family completely destroy their own lives. While the three so-called elites were busy ripping expensive fabric and screaming obscenities at each other, my attention shifted to the periphery of the foyer. Vanessa had been standing perfectly still, pressed against the mahogany doorframe for the past 20 minutes. The violent physical implosion of the family seemed to finally snap her out of her shock-induced paralysis. She looked at the chaotic pile of bodies on the floor and visibly recoiled. The realization hit her like a freight train. She had securely hitched her entire wagon to a sinking criminal ship, and the water was rising incredibly fast. Her wide, panicked eyes darted toward the heavy front door. She wanted to run. She needed to escape the blast radius before the federal authorities arrived to sift through the wreckage. I watched her slowly inch her way along the wall, attempting to move with absolute silence so she would not draw the attention of the brawling executives. She carefully reached out her trembling fingers, wrapping around the strap of her bright pink designer purse resting on the entryway table. She pulled the bag tightly against her chest, treating it like a bulletproof vest. Her stiletto heels clicked softly against the hardwood as she took a hesitant step toward the exit. She desperately wanted to slip out into the humid Atlanta night call, a rideshare service, and pretend she had never met the man currently bleeding on my rug. But the sheer volume of the fight was overwhelming, and she knew she could not just vanish without establishing her complete innocence first. She needed to aggressively distance herself from the radioactive mess unfolding in my home. She stopped near the door handle and cleared her throat, her high-pitched voice shaking uncontrollably as she tried to project an aura of total victimhood. "I am leaving!" she announced, her voice barely audible over Darius shouting. Nobody stopped fighting, so she yelled it louder, her tone laced with frantic desperation. I said I am leaving right now. I do not know anything about any stolen money or any offshore accounts. DeAndre completely lied to me. He manipulated me. He told me he was a successful single executive. I was tricked into dating a fraud. She pointed a manicured finger at the writhing pile on the floor, completely disowning the man she had proudly flaunted less than an hour ago. DeAndre, we are completely done. I am breaking up with you this exact second. Do not ever call my phone again. Do not ever try to contact me. I am entirely innocent in this situation, and I am walking out that door right now to resume my peaceful life. She grabbed the brass handle of the front door, turning the knob with desperate, frantic energy. She truly believed that simply declaring her breakup aloud would magically absolve her of any connection to a massive federal banking crime. She thought she could just walk away and seamlessly return to her glamorous influencer lifestyle, posting aesthetic photos from the very penthouse funded by stolen capital. She yanked the heavy door inward, but before she could even take a single step across the threshold, I moved. I pushed myself off the marble kitchen island and crossed the foyer with effortless, blinding speed. I did not run, but my long, confident strides carried me across the room in a matter of seconds. Just as Vanessa lifted her foot to step out into the humid night air, I slammed my hand flat against the heavy mahogany wood, pushing the door forcefully shut. The loud thud echoed sharply, causing Vanessa to jump backward in sheer terror. She gasped, dropping her designer bag to the floor. "You are not going anywhere, Vanessa," I stated, my voice radiating a chilling calm that completely froze her in place. I stepped directly in front of the exit, physically blocking her only escape route. I stood tall, looking down at the trembling woman who had strutted onto my porch, demanding I pack my belongings into garbage bags. She shrank back against the wall, her eyes wide and pleading. "Sienna, please," she begged, her voice cracking with raw panic. "Please let me leave. You got what you wanted. You completely destroyed him. He is ruined. I am not a threat to you anymore. I just want to go home to my apartment and forget this entire night ever happened. I promise I will never speak to him again." I smiled a cold, ruthless smile that made her physically shudder. "You are deeply confused about the nature of this situation, Vanessa," I replied, my tone completely devoid of any warmth. "You think this is just a petty dispute over a cheating husband. You think you are just the unfortunate other woman caught in the crossfire of a messy divorce. You walked into my home, criticized my furniture, and bragged about upgrading my lifestyle. You happily enjoyed the luxurious dinners, the shopping sprees, and the expensive gifts. You gleefully paraded your stolen lifestyle all over the internet, rubbing your fake wealth in the faces of your followers. And now that the bill has finally come due, you think you can simply declare a breakup and walk away completely unscathed." She shook her head frantically, tears spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her meticulous makeup. "But I did not do anything illegal," she cried, pressing her hands together in a pathetic gesture of prayer. "I just dated him. I did not know where the money came from. I swear to God I thought he was just incredibly rich. I am just an influencer. I do not know anything about federal bank fraud or money laundering. You have to let me leave, Sienna. I have a brand to protect. My entire career relies on my public image. If I get dragged into a messy financial scandal, my sponsors will drop me instantly. My entire livelihood will be completely ruined." I tilted my head, studying her desperate, tear-stained face. The sheer superficiality of her priorities was genuinely astounding. She was standing in a room where 3 people were facing decades in federal prison, and her primary concern was losing her skincare sponsorships. I crossed my arms over my chest, my stance creating an impenetrable barrier between her and freedom. "Your brand is the absolute least of your worries right now, Vanessa. You are not going back to your peaceful life because the life you are currently living is completely funded by a massive criminal enterprise." I stepped closer, forcing her to press her back flat against the wall. "The cold reality of federal law is about to hit you very hard," I explained, delivering the facts with brutal precision. "Ignorance is absolutely not a valid legal defense in federal court. You cannot simply claim you were a clueless girlfriend when your signature is on the lease agreements and the vehicle registrations. The authorities do not care if you actually understood the complex mechanics of offshore money laundering. They only care about where the stolen capital ended up, And right now, millions of dollars of embezzled corporate funds are sitting directly under your name. Vanessa let out a choked sob, sliding down the wall until she was crouching on the floor, clutching her knees to her chest. "No," she wailed, shaking her head violently. "No, that is not fair. He bought those things for me. They were gifts. The federal government does not recognize gifts purchased with stolen money, Vanessa," I stated, my voice completely stripped of any mercy. "When the FBI and the Financial Crimes Division execute their warrants tomorrow morning, they are going to trace every single dime DeAndre stole. They will see that the luxury penthouse you currently live in was secured using an illicit wire transfer. They will see that the designer car you drive was purchased with embezzled cash. Because your name is attached to those specific assets, the authorities will instantly freeze all of your personal bank accounts. They will seize the car. They will lock you out of the penthouse. You will wake up tomorrow morning with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back." Her eyes widened in absolute terror as she finally grasped the catastrophic magnitude of her involvement. She was not just losing a wealthy boyfriend, she was losing her entire physical existence. "But the financial seizure is only the beginning of your problems," I continued, ensuring every single word pierced her fragile ego. "By accepting those massive luxury assets, you became a direct beneficiary of a federal crime. The prosecutors are going to look at your social media accounts. They are going to see you bragging about the wealth you acquired. They are going to use your own videos and posts as hard evidence of your complicity. You will not be treated as a victim, Vanessa. You will be indicted as a knowing accessory to major corporate fraud and money laundering. Your entire influencer career is officially dead. Your sponsors will publicly sever all ties to avoid the massive radioactive backlash. You will not be posting aesthetic lifestyle content anymore. You will be sitting in a federal courtroom wearing a standard-issue jumpsuit, trying to convince a judge that you were just a naive girl who liked expensive shoes. You wanted so desperately to be part of the elite society. You wanted to skip the hard work and latch onto a man who could instantly provide you with a $2 million lifestyle. Well, congratulations, Vanessa. You got exactly what you wanted. You are now fully integrated into DeAndre life. You are tethered to his catastrophic failure, and you will be standing trial right alongside him. I stepped back, allowing her to fully absorb the absolute devastation of her future. There was no escape. No apology could reverse the wire transfers. Her greedy ambition had successfully secured her a front-row seat to a federal indictment. Vanessa remained curled on the floor of my foyer, weeping into her hands, as the absolute certainty of her ruined future finally settled into her bones. The oppressive silence in the room was suddenly broken by a faint, piercing wail echoing in the distance. The sound was distinct and rapidly growing louder. It started as a low hum echoing off the wealthy estates of Buckhead before escalating into a chorus of aggressive, blaring sirens. Everyone in the foyer froze. Darius stopped, gasping for air on the marble tiles. Kendra abruptly ceased her frantic sobbing and turned her head toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows facing the front lawn. DeAndre lifted his bruised face from the custom rug, his eyes wide with a new immediate terror. Through the sheer linen curtains, bright strobes of red and blue light began to violently slice through the darkness of the humid Atlanta night. The aggressive flashing colors bounced off the crystal chandelier, painting the faces of my husband and his toxic family in alternating shades of crimson and sapphire. The screech of heavy tires tearing onto my circular driveway confirmed their absolute worst nightmare. Multiple heavy vehicles slammed into park right outside my front door. Car doors flew open with heavy metallic thuds. Heavy boots pounded against the slate steps of my porch. DeAndre scrambled backward, pushing himself up against the base of the kitchen island. "What is that?" he gasped, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "What did you do, Sienna? Who is outside my house?" I did not move a single muscle. I stood perfectly still, bathed in the flashing police lights illuminating my foyer. "I told you, DeAndre," I replied, my voice carrying a lethal calm over the deafening roar of the sirens. "I do not make empty threats. I do not bluff, and I absolutely never leave a crisis management operation unfinished. You assumed I was standing here arguing with you to prove a point. You thought this was just a bitter domestic dispute over a divorce. but I do not waste my time arguing with criminals. I was simply keeping you occupied. I checked my watch, noting the exact time. Before I even pulled into the driveway tonight, I made a very detailed phone call. I contacted the Federal Financial Crimes Division and the Atlanta Police Department. I informed them that two men involved in a massive corporate embezzlement and money laundering scheme were currently located at this exact address. I provided them with the gate code to the neighborhood, and I gave them the unredacted digital dossier containing all of your offshore transactions, the forged property documents, and the illegal wire transfers. They have been mobilizing for the past hour while you were busy criticizing my interior decor and bragging about your fake wealth. The authorities are not waiting until tomorrow morning to raid your office, DeAndre. They are here right now to secure the primary suspects before you have any opportunity to destroy evidence or flee the state. You are completely out of time right now. The heavy mahogany front door burst open with tremendous force. A swarm of uniformed police officers and federal agents flooded into the grand foyer, shouting commands that instantly shattered the remaining quiet of the house. Hands in the air, an agent bellowed, pointing directly at DeAndre and Darius. "Do not make a single sudden movement. Get on the ground right now." Darius immediately threw his hands up, dropping flat onto his stomach on the cold marble floor. He offered absolutely zero resistance, his corporate arrogance completely obliterated by the sight of federal badges. DeAndre, however, was paralyzed by sheer panic. He stood frozen against the kitchen island, staring blindly at the officers as they rapidly advanced. Two agents grabbed his arms, twisting them forcefully behind his back. DeAndre let out a sharp cry of pain as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked securely around his wrists, locking him into his grim, new reality. DeAndre Washington, you are under arrest for federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. An agent recited loudly, reading him his rights while pressing him against the counter. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Kendra completely lost her mind. Seeing her wealthy, powerful brother physically restrained by law enforcement broke whatever fragile sanity she had left. She fell to her knees, crawling across the floor toward me. She grabbed the hem of my skirt, her heavy gold bracelets digging into my leg. "Sienna, please," she wailed, her voice ragged and desperate. "You have to make them stop. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. Please do not let them take my husband. We have children, Sienna. We have a reputation. I am so sorry for what I said. I am so sorry for everything. I will do whatever you want. Just tell them to let Darius go." I looked down at her tear-stained face, completely unmoved by her sudden performance of humility. She had brought garbage bags to throw away my life, and now she was begging for my mercy. I stepped back, forcing her to release my clothing. "I do not control the federal justice system, Kendra," I stated coldly. "You should have thought about your reputation before you decided to spend stolen money." Across the room, Vanessa was engaging in her own pathetic spectacle. Two officers were pulling her up from the floor, instructing her to place her hands behind her back. Vanessa began thrashing wildly, kicking her stiletto heels at the officer's shins. "Do not touch me," she shrieked hysterically. "Do not touch my jacket. This is authentic designer couture. You are wrinkling the fabric. I am an influencer. You cannot arrest me on camera. I need to call my manager." The officers ignored her ridiculous demands, expertly securing her wrists and marching her toward the flashing lights outside. She continued screaming about her ruined brand and her expensive purse until she was shoved into the back of a waiting squad car. The foyer was completely cleared of their toxic noise, leaving only the harsh reality of their— An agent grabbed DeAndre by the shoulder, physically turning him toward the open front door to begin the march to the police transport. "Wait!" I called out, my voice cutting cleanly through the chaotic activity of the foyer. The agent paused, looking at me for confirmation. I took a slow, deliberate step toward my husband. DeAndre stood there in his ruined, bespoke suit, his face bruised from his fight with Darius, his eyes red and swollen from crying. He looked absolutely pathetic, stripped of his title, his money, and his fake power. I reached down and picked up the thick stack of divorce papers that he had arrogantly shoved across the kitchen island an hour ago. I retrieved the heavy gold fountain pen he had so proudly offered me. I uncapped the pen and flipped to the signature page. I did not hesitate. I did not blink. I pressed the golden nib to the crisp, white paper and smoothly signed my name with bold, sweeping strokes. I executed the final legal maneuver that permanently severed my tie to his catastrophic failure. I carefully folded the signed document into a neat, compact square. I stepped directly into DeAndre's personal space, invading the tiny bubble of freedom he had left. I reached out and tucked the folded divorce papers neatly into the breast pocket of his expensive ruined suit jacket. I smoothed the lapel down with a mockingly gentle pat. I promised you I would sign them, DeAndre. I whispered, my voice so quiet, only he could hear the lethal finality in my tone. You walked onto my porch tonight, fully intending to destroy me, because you thought my silence was weakness. You thought because I did not brag loudly or flaunt my wealth that I was an easy target. But you made the most fatal mistake a man can make. You severely underestimated a quiet, intelligent black woman. While you were loudly boasting about shifting millions, I was quietly controlling the people who own the billions. You wanted to play a ruthless game, but you lacked the discipline to survive it. Enjoy federal prison, DeAndre. I hear they do not care much about your corporate aesthetic in there. DeAndre let out a broken, sobbing gasp, unable to form a single word of defense as the agent shoved him forward, marching him out into the humid Atlanta night. I stood perfectly still, watching the red and blue lights wash over his retreating figure. The officers escorted Darius out right behind him, followed closely by a weeping, defeated Kendra, who was left to face the absolute ruin of her elite social standing entirely alone. The heavy wooden door closed with a firm, solid click, shutting out the noise, the flashing lights, and the toxic chaos they had brought to my doorstep. I turned around, taking a deep breath of the quiet, peaceful air in my beautifully empty grand foyer. The garbage bags were gone. The threat was neutralized. The trash had officially taken itself out. I picked up my keys from the marble counter, slipping my phone into my pocket. It was time to walk next door. It was time to pick up my son and start our new, completely untouchable life.